Grandfather walk like a mule on Stallmeyer estate, cutlass in and lifting them heavy grapefruit crate. Me grandfather walk his life out for all them French Creoles, cutting cane, picking coffee and burning coals. But while me grandfather was perspiring, the wealthy French Creoles were gathering. Now their grandchildren living in luxury and making style on me and me 5 picnics. I want me grandfather back there. You hear what I say? They hold me grandfather back there. You call them where I'm from, yeah. I want me grandfather back there. I want him to stand me there. They hold me grandfather back there. The Votal Guns and Dilemma, O'Brien, Grant and O'Connor, fill their bank books and build their empire from the sweat of me grandfather. Me grandfather worked like a horse. It was blood, sweat, tears and good force. No house, no land, no bank book, no pension to leave for his grandchildren. I want me grandfather back there. They hold me grandfather back there. When we Pumanje, I want him Mr. Nive. Oh. Me grandfather cut like show and dance cocoa by Mr. Gibbs and Trisha. Me grandfather had to cut grass, feed and clean the horses and run errands for the wives of his white bosses. And while me granddad outside gardening, the wife inside the white woman kitchen, cooking, washing, starching, bleaching, ironing, and on she had a pin, piece of white linen. I want me grandfather back there. I want him Mr. Taddy. They know me grandfather back there. I want me grandfather back there. You from west side of place. They owe me grandfather back there. Mr. Bolton, Dean Obriga, Mr. Booth, Hawkins and Fletcher left their bank books for their son and daughter. Not a cent from the grandfather. The grandfather worked like a horse. It was blood, sweat, tears and good force. No house, no land, no bank book, no pension to leave for his grandchildren. I want me grandfather back there. They owe me grandfather back there. Si moi pas trouvé l'argent, moi t'ai tué. Oh. Used to carry me to Manzanilla, to dry copra, for Gaston Gigans, the French planter. Sometimes we would walk from Dutch Road to Tortuga about 12 miles to pick orange for Mr. Adrian the Votal. When William Gordon founded Gordon Grant, the grandma mixed cement to build that plant and taught dry goods in crockers back by the tons for the Oprahs and Sons and the friend Alstons. I want my grandfather back there. They owe me grandfather back there. All them French Creoles. I want my grandfather back there. They owe me grandfather back there. Alston's working till he get old. Grandpa takes so much hot and cold. In the night, if you hear the old man groan, I try to dry up all the bone. No medicine, no doctor fee. The society card empty. The bury in Lavanti Cemetery unceremoniously. I want me grandfather back there. God declared today, they hold me grandfather back here. À présent, c'est les pour moi parler. War declared today. Ngozi must manger. Dedicated to your grandfather and mine, for the deeds of perspiration that flowed from their foreheads in our interest, and for Isaac Liverpool, my father, who worked hard beyond the call of familial duty to give me an education. For this, we say thanks.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. As the young people would say, oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Good evening to you. I want my grandfather back pay, dedicated to all our grandfathers, our great grandparents. The music, the lyrics, the creativity of Dr. Hollis Liverpool, the mighty chalk dust, the mighty chalk dust. I want my grandfather back. But chalk dust sang that way back in the 80s, early 80s. So that's about 40 years old. So this reparations thing is not new. And, we're bringing them out to let you all know that our artists, Sparrow sang I'm a Slave way back in the early 60s. So you're talking about 60 years. And he said, they work me, no pay. I want my grandfather back pay. I want my grandfather back. We're not letting up. We know that we are disturbing them. But as Brother Bob Marley said, I want to disturb my neighbor. We want to disturb them because we're not letting up. Convenience, let them get off the hook for a long time. It let them get off the hook because we weren't centering our narrative. We were doing nation building, We were building Guyana, and so, we were subduing our own cultural identity, our own racial demands. Because we were building Guyana, we were building this new nation. And so we made some sacrifices. We put our demands one side and, to build this new nation. But this new nation has not always been nice to us. Guyana has not always been nice to Africans, even when Africans are in power. This nation state called Guyana has not always been nice to Guyana. Colonial Guyana, we give them our all. The slave state, we give them our all. For nothing, they didn't pay us. And they've not been nice to us. And we are nice people. And we say, well, let the past be the past. That's what they want. I know of all the sentiments around the Gladstones coming. And I agree with a lot of those sentiments. But I tell you, I'm glad the Gladstones come. Because in coming, they have allowed us to put our case on the front burner again. And this time, we're not letting loose. We're talking about an African cultural revolution in Guyana. And that African cultural revolution must mean the regaining and the recapturing of our cultural past, linking us to Africa, tracing our footsteps, tracing that journey across the Middle Passage, transatlantic slave trade, on the plantations of the Americas, creating wealth for Europe, for America, turning the wild coast of Guyana into a civilized space, taking our own cash money and buying lands and showing Guyana what civilization means, creating the villages, the village movement, showing them what a nation can be. The villages are the bedrock of our national politics, our civilization. We were there, always there, and we are still here to tell the story. And yet, Guyana has not always been nice to us. Guyana is telling our elected leaders, I will not speak to you if you don't shake my hand. Oh my God. The state of Guyana is bulldozing our homes in 2023. Oh my God. Guyana is spitting in the face of our women. Oh my God. Guyana is shooting down our boys, left, right, and center. Oh my God, in their beds at night. Guyana is locking up our lawyers for doing what lawyers all over the world do. Oh my God. In 2023, Guyana put an African leader in shackles. In shackles. We're not talking about mental, we're talking about physical shackles. Oh my God. Guyana has not and still is not nice to Black people. They're not going to get away with it. They're not. And so I am glad the white people came. I don't care too much about the apologies and so on. I think that's good. The real apology will have to come from the state, the nation states of Europe that benefited. I'm glad the white people come so that they can acknowledge what we always knew, which is that we were victims of the most inhuman economic and political system the world has ever known, mankind has ever known. And we live in a society that doesn't acknowledge that. A society that tells us about all kinds of things, but they don't acknowledge that our enslavement created wealth for others. Our enslavement led to our labor being used to humanize the space and create freedom, some semblance of freedom, so that others will not come as slaves. Guyana is not nice to Black people. I don't know about other leaders who don't want to say it, who looking over their shoulder, who looking behind them. I am not. I'm saying Guyana has not been nice and continues not to be nice to Black people. And as the son of a Black man and a Black woman, I ain't taking that anymore. And you're all not supposed to take it. Every time you do something, they find something. Kofi created the 1763 rebellion. Oh, Kofi was a dictator. Kofi is a damn hero. Oh, Kofi wanted to put in place the same thing he was fighting against. They always tried to find some fault with what we did. 1763 is the beginning of Guyanese nationhood. Kofi showed us what resistance could lead to. He opened the doors. He said to the Dutch people, take off and give me off. You talk about power sharing, shared governance? Kofi, since then, he didn't say, give us all. He was ready to negotiate. You all take half of our beats and give us half. And they tell us, oh, Kofi was this, and Kofi was a hero. 1823. They could not be 1823 without 1763. The age of revolution from the mid-1700s to the mid-1800s. 1763 is right in there. 1823 is right up there. The largest slave rebellion in the history of rebellions against slavery in our Guyana. 1823 revolt. Guyana has not been nice and is not nice. I don't want for any moment Irfan Ali or Jack Dio to talk for me when it comes to slavery and black issues. I don't mind their support, but don't talk for me. Don't talk for black people. You cannot. Let me tell white people what we want. Sometimes you got to make some tough decisions. 200 years after 1823, the pans, the guns, the beheading of our foreparents, parading them on that ground. They're still beheading us economically, politically, physically. You are not shaking our leader's hand. You are not talking to our leader, our elected leader, 200 and odd thousand votes. And you are not talking to him because he don't shake your hand. Your hand. Your hand. Your hand has the blood of the state on it. Or in Boston, Quindon Bacchus. Why should he shake that hand? This is my hand, Martin Carter says. Looking at my hand. This is my hand for the revolution. That night there will be thousands of torches from the hospital. The lame will come. Those who are mad will become sane for the revolution. Those who are weak will become strong for the revolution. And I myself shall be so fiercely happy that I'll make my shirt a banner for the revolution. Our revolution. Black people, you all gotta get dread. Dreader than dread. You all know what dread means. Tonight, we're gonna talk about colliding things. 1823, reparations, 1763. You get the damn temerity to send people at Timeri Airport to say you picketing white people? The white people don't come to you. It's not your business. Let me deal with them. You boycott the thing at UG because you wanted to go to a certain place. Gone are the days when we say we want a statue at Parade Ground and you carry it to the seawall. We're not doing that anymore. You're wiser. Good evening to all of you. Good evening. Good evening. Wisdom cometh from those who feeleth. When you're unintelligent as the president of Guyana, we can't help but expect that kind of behavior, shameful ignorance and impolite of any president. The wisdom come from boxing back down side. It could have come from any back down side. Unintelligent. One thing I like about our people, we understand what intelligence is. Can't fool we with that. Tonight we're going to continue to walk this journey. Brother Martin said, I've been to the mountaintop and I've looked over. I've been to the mountaintop. And I've looked over. And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I know as a people we're going to get there. The promised land is not far off because we're working overtime. Now that you see the light, what you're going to do? Stand up for your right. Now that we see the light, we're going to stand up for our right. That's what they want. Let me bring in my guest tonight, Dr. Simpson Perry Silver. What they say? Know that name. The youngest government minister in modern times. He wasn't 30 years. In modern times. I always tell people, you know, in 1953 when they won that first election on the adult suffrage, the United People's Progressive Party, not this present one, the old one. Fobbs Burnham was just 30 years old. Sidney King was just 28 years old. Martin Carter was just 25 years old. There were little boys. Dr. Gunn was 35. He was a little bit older than the rest of them. Mrs. Jagan was 33. And Simpson de Silva was appointed a minister by Fobbs Burnham when he was 28, I think, or he gonna tell us the real age that he was. Know that name. And he's still in the struggle. Tonight he's gonna help us talk this thing through and plan this thing through. Brother Simpson, Dr. de Silva, welcome to Politics 101 again.
Thank you, David. I hope you hear me.
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Excellent. I am pleased to be invited by you to share my views on the issue at hand. And I must thank the viewers in Guyana and around the diaspora for tuning in. And I would like to say happy International Day for People of African Descent all around the world. It was identified by the United Nations that today is a special day for us. But I would like us to understand clearly that every day is special for us, people of African descent. Not because one day was assigned, then we think that only that day matters. We must do things, significant things, every day, every moment. And I have to try my best, David, not to repeat the things you said, but would like to bring some focus from my vantage point into this whole discussion. Just to clarify, I was 25 when I was appointed by Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham as the Minister of Agriculture. And David, I would like to point out upfront that we have been hearing a lot of things from the government and the government reparation committee, the committee that is funded by the government to speak on reparations. But I strongly believe that apart from the voice of the government or a committee sponsored by the government, we should have a greater role for civil society across the nation. That is civil society for people of African descent. I know it uh, that the organization or the committee reparations has some civil society represented here, but I specifically a committee that is funded by a government. We need a civil society that is non-governmental in nature. Then we need to have the private sector playing a significant role. In other words, the private sector for people of African descent. And in addition, academia, academia in the broadest sense of the word, not just merely University of Ghana, but our academic community throughout the length and breadth of Ghana. And trade union needs to step up because the trade unions have a special role to play and should be speaking to representation all the time. And in addition to that, we have the media, which fortunately has that special role to play. And apart from all of that, now the international development partners, all of us need to be working regularly, daily, on the issue of reparations, on the issue of the current state of being in Guyana for people of African descent, the whole issue of inclusion of people of African descent in the sustainable development of our country. Because when our ancestors, as you rightly put it, our ancestors were fighting to be recognized as human beings, to be treated as human beings, especially due to the fact that they were getting no pay. And we are calling not necessarily for the back pay, we're talking about their pay. We're talking about monies that were denied by our ancestors and money which the colonizers, upon enslaving the our ancestors, our African foreparents, they used that money to develop their countries and their families. And we are saying, because of the fact that slavery, we know that it was a crime against humanity. We knew it was the worst thing that could have ever happened in the face of the earth. But my question is, how do we, even at this time, still do not have a state of emergency for that kind of agenda? Because it's an agenda that is really cockeyed. The fact is that our resources were stolen. Our people were abused, raped, maimed, killed, hung, and all the like. And so at this time, I do not recall a state of emergency be declared so that we can right the wrong now. And that is why I, like yourself, I'm pleased to know that the Gladstones came here to apologize. And I had encounter with them, and I think it is genuine. But as we all know, the descendants of the former British Prime Minister, as in the Gladstone, came and met with us, the descendants of people of African descent, or to be more specific, the descendants of Africans who were enslaved here. And we are the beneficiaries of those Africans. We are Africans. It is our gift, it's our heritage that the Europeans have stolen. And we say that irrespective of what is happening with respect to the apology, we need to have that conversation. Parallelly, we must have action and we must bring about solution in our heritage villages. You cannot compare and you cannot confuse and mix up enslavement and indentureship. And I think that was clearly set by most of you, most of us. And we must demand that not just merely what we see is happening now continues, because of my vantage point, it is lukewarm. We, as leaders, must get together with all our brothers and sisters, bring them to the table. Let us unite and let us make that call, a clarion call, not only for Guyana and the Caribbean, but the entire world where Africans were enslaved. And that is from the continent to all other parts of the diaspora. The time for serious, immediate, urgent action is now. And that needs to be very clear. Also, we must demand that part of the action must be unequivocal equity at home. Because currently, there's a lot of inequity in all facets or all the sectors in Guyana. And we need to make a special effort to engage all and sundry, engage the government, involve the private sector, involve all to make sure that we are genuine, we are sincere, and we do something about it now. And all the land grabbing must stop, all the abuses must stop, and we must have what you call equal rights and justice. We must have equality. We must have peace. We don't want war. We don't want racism. We don't want discrimination. We don't want marginalization. We don't want something that is featuring a lot right now, which is Afrophobia. We don't want that. We want brothers and sisters coming together, working together for the common good of all of us. We have always been inclusive, and we want to continue that way. That is my humble introductory position, David.
Yeah,
Action.
thank you very much. Thank you very much for that call to action, my brother. And I want to say something with the first point you made about broadening this whole reparations movement and to bring in the various segments of our community into it. Last night, Brother Lincoln Lewis was on, and we felt that enough was not done to really rope in as many organizations when the Gladstones were here. And I got a text from Brother Eric Phillips, who said that invitations were sent out to the African Guyanese organizations and individuals, and I want to apologize to Brother Eric because I did not know of that. And I want to invite Brother Eric to come on to this program to talk about the old reparation initiative. He hasn't been on in a long time. And there's an open invitation for him to come on and for us to talk. And I have to commend Brother Eric and the Reparations Committee for the work that they've put in on these issues. And as I said last night, calling for a broadening is not a criticism. It's what Bobby Seals said. I think it was Bobby Seals who said, seize the time. We have a time, and we've got to seize this time. And we've got to make this thing big, because they would want this thing to quiet down. And what I am saying is that we need a domino effect. This moment must not be allowed to come and go. And so I invite Brother Eric to come on and for us to talk about where reparations are, where the movement is. My brother, let's go back in time, if you will, because you're part of an 1823 committee that has been staging activities around the country this year to observe this 200th anniversary. And the whole 1823 thing is linked, of course, to the Gladstones and to reparations and so on. Why 2 years, 200 years after 1823, that moment, why 200 years after, we are still grappling with the phenomenon of 1823? Why your committee felt it was important to come together and to highlight and to observe and commemorate that 1823 moment?
David, we had to do what we were doing and still are doing and will continue to do, because when we checked on the ground in Guyana, we did some very informal surveys because we didn't have money to carry out formal surveys. And we found out that 99% of the people of Guyana did not know anything about the 1823 revolution. And that is not only adults, but the young people. When you go to the young people of Guyana, you find that about 99.9% did not know anything. So we came together and decided that we had to do something. Led by Sister Penda, Rudy Gayan, myself and others, we decided to go into the school. Fortunately, we were allowed into the school system, and we did a series of conversation in all the schools from Mahika to Georgetown. And then apart from that, we decided we had to go into the villages to have the conversation about what is transpiring. Unfortunately, David, African Guyanese history is not being taught in our schools, and we think that it's a great error, a great disservice. We think it is wrong, and it's one of the things that should be corrected immediately. There's no reason why our people, all the races, should not know the truth of what transpired in Guyana. And when you go around the Caribbean and the rest of the world, you find that the phenomena is relatively the same. So Guyana would be setting a serious, would be a model, a world model for what is going to be considered true inclusion of not only people of African descent in economic sphere, but economic, political, social, cultural, and environmental. So we feel that we need to do a lot of education. And that education, David, is not just merely to those who are what we may not call in the mainstream. We need to educate our leaders. There's a need for training of trainers. People need to be taught. I find that a lot of our leaders have a lot of gaps, a lot of holes, a lot of missing pieces. So we need to hasten and find the resources to come together and have the conversation. And it is because of those serious gaps, holes, challenges, we decided that we in the 1823 committee was going to highlight what the 1823 was all about. And we thought that the bicentenary is an opportune moment. And we are calling upon on all of us in Ghana, the diaspora, to support Guyana, support Caribbean, support Latin America, support the world. Because if you check recently, there's a movement, a precise movement now by African nations to call for reparations the way the Caribbean did. And we must see this challenge, this struggle as us, not a different set of people in different countries. We must see as ourselves as Africans because the injustice, the genocide, the inhumane treatment was to Africans. And we as people of African descent must unite and get that 1+ billion people talking so that this would never happen again. And we must have just reparation for all of us, for those people who were enslaved.
And, say, and let's go back to 1823. What is it we should know about 1823? What about that intervention by our foreparents that we should know about? That we should walk. Yeah. We should walk with every day as we move around.
Very important to note is that our ancestors decided that enough was enough and they couldn't take it any longer. And they decide that they must, by their own bootstraps, their own hands, their own physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual capacity, take the matters in their hands to free themselves. And they decided to go on the walk, that glorious walk, that walk from Jamaica to Georgetown, to be precise, to the parade ground. And while they were walking peacefully, when they reached Bachelor's Adventures, they were told by the colonizers, they were told by the enslavers, they were told by those who imprisoned them that they must not go one step further. And they decided, no, they're going to stand up and fight for their right. And their fight was that peaceful walk. And while they step over that line, they were shot. 250, at least 100, different people say different numbers, were shot and killed. And then after that, they proceeded to walk. They were resistant, resilient. They proceeded to walk and walked to parade ground. And when they reached there, they were tried, 45 of them, and they were found guilty. That's the leaders who were still remaining, and they were beheaded, and their heads were taken off and hung on posts along the coast so as to deter them from standing up and fighting for their human rights, standing up and fighting so that they would be paid, standing up and fighting so that no longer they must take the work that they do and don't pay and just use it for their aggrandizement. So our people decided that enough was enough, and that was what was meted out to them. I think, David, every every Guyanese needs to know those basic truths. We're not lying, it's the truth. And why is it that the story is not being told? So that we know and could fight that those kinds of things must never happen again. Never. Never happen to us and never happen to our future generation. We must protect us. And it is the thing that should signal to us that we would fight for the protection of all our ancestral villages.
Simpson,
Protect and preservation.
Simpson, the march, the whole activity did not drop from the sky. Evidently was a lot of planning that went into it. Talk a little bit about the planning. Where,
Yes.
when, how, who?
That planning, unfortunately or unfortunately, they didn't have cell phones. But our ancestors used spiritual vibrations. They used the drums. They used various methods that they were taught. They taught themselves and they used them in the churches, in the homes, in the fields, in the factories, wherever they came together. Imagine it, and pulled together 13,000 individuals to stand up and fight for their rights. I wish that today we could at least do that and better, because we have all other means of communications. So the African brothers and sisters, the African, our fathers, our grandfathers, our great grands, that is what they did. They came together and they used all methods that they thought fit to communicate. Some of them even communicated with plaits, different designs in their hairs that the white man didn't know about. Unfortunately, it was very successful, and the movement all over Guyana, or the group of people, African ancestors in this sense, had the unity, had the cooperation throughout the length and breadth of Guyana, and that is what led to
the Congregational Church. The Congregational Church played a role. Talk to us about that. How did that come about?
Yeah, the Congregational Church played a vital role by the involvement of the priests or the ministers and those who felt that the unjust situation must stop. So there was mobilization within the church system. That is why when recently fate would have it that when the Gladstone came, an event was to be held in Buxton, and instead on the, I think is the eve of the event, we were told that a wedding was planned and that building could not be used. That is the Tipperary Hall. And the representation was made to the same Congregational Church for the gathering to take place right in the church. Unfortunately, it was a glorious, great event in the church. So the church played
yes,
a significant role.
And the BV Church, which was central, there was an activity at the BV Church the week before. And
Yeah,
the
so
BV Church was actually a place where they met and did some planning. Yes?
Yes, correct. That is true. We tried to retrace the path where that were fundamental for our ancestors in the 1823 revolution. And we in telling our story, it's important to know that we are not repeating what the colonizers said. They speak of the revolt, but we're calling it a revolution because the changes were so significant. And that 1763, 1823 is responsible for where we are today and us being able to be.
Talk about some of those immediate changes that came about as a result of that revolution in 1823.
Um, well, the most important one for me, which I don't know why it is so, it took them so long that in 1834, technically, slavery was abolished. But
Yeah.
the colonizers thought that the people who were working on the plantations, doing the same kind of work for so long, should go through a period of apprenticeship. And there is it, just to steal much more of our money and not to pay us the way we ought to be paid. And then eventually, in 1838, we got our emancipation. And fortunately, thereafter, the monies that were earned, our ancestors were able to pool resources together and purchase the plantations which they converted 55, I think it was, to villages. And eventually, the whole thing about the village movement, unique in the world. So it is those kinds of tangible and intangible heritage that cannot be compared to any other phenomena, any other part in the world. And it's important that we speak to it. It must be understood clearly and it must be dealt with separately. I firmly believe, we from the committee firmly believe that, and we as Africans, African Guyanese, but Africans first, must make sure that by sweat and tears, and hopefully not blood, that we protect those tangible and intangible heritages that were bequeathed to us and that our children and grandchildren and great grandchildren must benefit. And in addition to that, David, it's critical that we put at the center of all of this the sustainable development of our people of African descent. Because currently in Guyana, sustainable development of a lot of races, including the Amerindians, they have over 200 village plans that were financed. They have a ministry, they have a secretariat, and they have all kinds of interventions from the international development partners. We in Guyana, as people of African descent, deserve at least a fair share. The East Indians are benefiting tremendously in so many ways. The Portuguese, the Europeans, all we say, let us leave no one behind. Let us take into serious consideration the efforts of our ancestors and our heritage currently.
Simpson, do you believe that the current Guyana state, as a successor state to the slave and colonial state, do you believe that they should be part of this repairing, this reparation for African people?
Well, I like I indicated earlier, but I'll be specific now, David. The government has a role to play. The government is the government is the government. And should make sure that there's enabling environment in this country. But the business of Africans, the business of African Guyanese must be spearheaded by African Guyanese leaders. We must take our rightful place and lead. We must make sure, though, that the government, the private sector, civil society, the church, the trade unions, the media, all international business partner, all of us working together. But this agenda must be led by African Guyanese, must be led by Africans. And we have to make sure that those hands where this thing would be placed would be safe hands. We have a lot of work to do, David. We have to speed up the conversation, speed up action, take solutions as we go along in our heritage village. I call it cash. And we have to use African traditional methodologies, which is ATM. So the cash ATM must, or cash ATM technology, cash ATM machinery must be led by us, African leaders.
Dr. Simpson De Silva of the 1823 committee here tonight, talking to us about the importance of the 1823 revolution, reparative justice, the fact that the movement is sanctioned by the United Nations makes it more than just an African, it's a human rights issue. And Dr. De Silva, as you move through Guyana and go from place to place, is there more of a thirst today among people of African descent for this conversation and this movement for reparative justice?
David, there's apart from a thirst, which is one of the Sustainable Development Goals, clean water. They need clean water. But apart from that, there's a hunger. Number 2 goal, zero hunger. There's a hunger for this information. I am in the villages on a daily basis, all over Guyana. The young people are hungry, thirsty. They're calling upon us to lead. They're calling upon us to make sure we include them. That, David, I must say to us, we have to make an extra special effort to include our brothers and sisters, especially those young people, in this conversation. And as I indicated to you, even today, I had a discourse with some people on the west side of the Demerara River. And even the Ipadaji concept came up. And they're convinced that Ipadaji has a place, as a unique place, as an organization. Treating ought to be done like with any organization. I was with Ipadaji from the inception. We have worked tirelessly. And the International Decade for People of African Descent Assembly would be having its General Assembly next month. And we hope to have all the organizations present and to trash out issues among ourselves. All African organizations in Guyana, in the diaspora, around the world, have a place. I'm calling upon all of us to reach out and help, join the conversation in the local communities in Guyana. The connection needs to be made with those of us who left or who migrated. And that is why the importance of migration and diaspora involvement is critical. UG just launched a special institute for migration and diaspora. That kind of institution or educational engagement belongs to also at the grassroots level. So I would like to see us establish grassroots migration and diasporal um, activities throughout the length and breadth of Guyana. Every village should have a migration and diasporal event. A matter of fact, our ancestors, when they came in 16th century and the 17th century, whatever those times were, those were migratory movement. But guess what? They were involuntary migration. That's another special distinction. They didn't volunteer to come here, but it was migration. And then those people fought the good fight. For those in the diaspora who are enjoying themselves now to be a reality. So it is just fair that all and sundry in the diaspora of African descent and whomever else reach back to the villages and try to galvanize this effort. The time for that kind of conversation, action, solution is now, David. We need to see
it's evident, Simpson, that the government boycotted most of the visit by the Gladstones. What's going on there?
To be honest, I didn't do a spectral introspection of that. But what I know, I attended almost all the forums that were planned by the Guyana Reparations Committee, and together with 1823 committee, and I did not see the presence on the ground of the government representatives as is customary. So we need to do some serious dialogue with the system, because as I indicated, I know for sure that the government has a role to play, and that role that the state has to play ought to be carefully dealt with. We, as a people, currently, if just isolate one thing, contracts and certain kinds of jobs, we're not seeing them in the hands of African Guyanese. We need some kind of affirmative action to make sure there's some kind of equity and equality with respect to African Guyanese. And I must pause at this time to congratulate the group of experts who have done some significant work to have what you call the operationalization of the Agenda 2030 and for development and its sustainable development goals for the inclusion of people of African descent in all its work. And there need to be some special effort, extra special effort at this time for the operationalization of that in Guyana, because Guyana currently can and must be the model for the world. I've been checking what's going on around the world, and we in Guyana are doing a relatively good work, and we must give support to all of us who have decided, like the ancestors, to come together, to work together for this common good. I hope that answers your question, David.
Yes, Dr. Simpson de Silva here tonight, sharing with us his insights and information. Good evening to all of you. Good evening, Donnet Booker. Brother Jeffrey out there in Mocha, Arcadia. Raquel Gentle, good evening. Good evening to all of you. Good night to those of you who are joining us from Europe. Those of you who are joining us from the continent, good evening to all of you. And of course, all of you in Guyana. Good evening, and thanks again for joining us as we continue this journey. Dr. De Silva, your closing thoughts?
We must remember clearly that we are fighting for our human rights. Our ancestors fought for the human rights and they were successful at it. The ancestors gave a lot of valuable lessons to us, and we are thankful to those lessons. But we, at this time, have to understand clearly that we're not begging for anything. We're not asking for favors. We're asking for the resources that are ours, our financial resources, our cultural resources, our environmental resources, our resources in general, and in many cases, our spiritual resources. And we have to go back and be grounded and be rooted in our spirituality, because that is our foundation. We must not forget the ancestral lands. We must stop the land grabbing. We must require that our lands are protected and resources are given, not taken away. Adequate resources are given for the sustainable development of our lands, of our waters, of our hills, our mountains, our savannas. It is critical that we understand that there's an obligation by the state, an obligation by the Europeans, and the last time I checked, it's a crime against humanity, and many of those people who committed those crimes could be charged posthumously against those crimes against humanity. And it's important that all of us clearly stand up and fight for our right, that we unite, we stop the bickering and backbiting, and unite and fight for the rights of our people. And we go to those who are left further behind and bring them forward and let them be part of this prosperity for all of us in this oil-rich Guyana, forest-rich Guyana, water-rich Guyana, human resource-rich Guyana, and truly we will be the model of the world. We, people of African descent, together with other Guyanese.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Simpson De Silva, your interventions tonight have been so timely and contribute to raising the level of our discussion and our discourse. Thank you again. Thank you. Thank you. And to you, our audience, I want to say thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Carl, Abigail Abrams, Leslyn Rollins, Donna, Diane Yearwood, Michael Reed, Marla Hallecock, of course, our brother Vibert White out there on the East Bank in Grove. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to those of you joining us from the quarantine coast. My brother, Albert Morgan, Desiree Manuel, Karen Black. Karen, thank you so much. Karen is loyal, always loyal. Forever loyal. Thank you, Karen, for your support. Emily is a trooper. Emily Durant, thank you so much. Carol Jacobs, and thank all of you for staying with us and making this journey a worthwhile journey. Tomorrow night we come again to continue our conversation as we leave tonight. Remember our brothers and sisters in Jacksonville, Florida. where once again they killed Africans because they're Africans. They killed Africans because they're Africans. And we in Guyana and the Caribbean have to fear that that kind of phenomenon may come to our country. They start first with the hate speech, the manifestos, calling us hungry belly and what have you. And they then move from that towards killing. We have to guard against that kind of culture does not come to Guyana. The state is already killing our people. And now we saw individuals spitting in the face of our Black women. And our prayers to those people in Jacksonville, Florida. This week we observe the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. That march led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., where he gave I Have a Dream speech. And that I Have a Dream speech is, in a sense, minimized. But that speech is much deeper than they make it out to be. We remember the organization of that march, the organizers of that march. Remember the then young men and women who helped to make that march possible. And it was the March for Jobs, the March on Washington. They didn't want it to happen. We remember 1823, not because we want to romanticize Black history. Remember it so that we can draw the connection between then and now. We remember it so that we can be strengthened in our fight to make the crooked pathways and roadways in Guyana straight, as we have always been called upon to do. 1823 must be a call to action. It must be a call to action. It must be a call to those who today want to assume the role of the plantation owners. And we must say to them, oh, never, 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 never. We're not walking down that road again. And we're going to do this together. We're going to do it together. Any attempt to equate indentureship with slavery is an assault on the very dignity of the African, but it's also a form of disrespect to Indian people and Chinese people and Portuguese people. We have to ensure that history is told accurately. There are some things that must not be left to interpretation. There are some things that are facts, F-A-C-T-S. Indentureship was a consequence of Black people's freedom from slavery. The consequence of Black people's freedom from slavery. It was invented. It was designed to break the morale of those who free themselves from slavery. And today, in trying to link those two systems, is in a way of saying to us Africans, your case is weak. You're lying about your experience. Some of them have gone so far to say, it is the indentures who came here and maintain the colonial system to feed Black people. But we're not going to allow them to carry on with those narratives. Education has been a form of mobility, social mobility for us, but it must be more than that. It must be a form of liberation, giving back. Those of us who have had the good fortune of, as they say, going far in school, we must not believe that we got there because we are so smart, we are so bright. We got there because people cleared the way for us. And so it is important that we come back. We come back when we are finished doing our professional duties, to come back and to do a more important duty. And that is the duty of lifting our people and moving us forward. Always moving, the exodus of Jah people. We are constantly moving and searching. And as we move and we search, we are creating, we are leaving footprints along the way. We are enriching humanity, just as in the early days, in the Nile Valley, when the people of Nubia and Egypt and Ethiopia were able to enrich the Greeks and the Romans. And that is why when you go in the Old Testament, our story is told there. Because we influence Christianity. And as we were influencing Christianity in those early days of antiquity, those early days, what they call ancient Africa, we were influencing Islam at the same time. And that is why African people found themselves in Asia and the Middle East. You go to Saudi Arabia and all those countries in the Middle East and India and Pakistan, black people are there. We have to shape Islam and shape Christianity. We have to shape Europe. We have to shape Asia and Africa. And we shaped the Americas. We shaped the Americas. Our footprints are all over the world. When Europeans look at their wealth today, they have to admit that the image of the African is on those stolen wealth. Stolen wealth. We continue keeping on as we must. As we must. Nobody's going to turn us around. Don't let them do that. Don't let them tell us that we are doing a disservice to Guyana if we talk and tell our story. Our history did not begin with slavery. Our history began long before slavery. But the experience of slavery has taken that history to another level. We survived slavery to recapture our history, reversing the sails, going back to Africa, linking our hands and our hearts with our brothers and sisters across the Caribbean, across the Western Hemisphere, across the world. They came before Columbus. Yes, African people were in the West before Columbus. We influence a lot of what is there. God bless Kofi and Atta. God bless the leaders of the 1823 revolution, the 1834 uprising. God bless our ancestors. And they paved the way for us. Fight we must. Fight we must. And never be ashamed to say we are black. And because we are black, we have to fight for black people to always be situated at the center of world civilization, because that's where we have always belonged. I'll see you all tomorrow night. No time to lose, no time to waste. We're coming back tomorrow night to continue. Say hello to Brother Sherrod for me, and hello to Brother Mark. And those of you who make it up early in the morning, say hello to Kadaki for me. Until tomorrow night.
If you hear that,